G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to show you how you can permanently loosen a tight ulnar nerve. And what's really interesting about ulnar nerve dysfunction is that we tend to forget that that ulnar nerve originates from the base of your neck and the top of your upper back. And not only that, but the nerve passes through your armpit, exits down through the inside of your arm as it goes down into your hands and fingers. So not only do we want to pay attention to where you feel your specific symptoms, but if we're not looking along the entire course of that nerve, then you could genuinely be missing the root underlying cause of why some part of that ulnar nerve has become dysfunctional. So let's get into it. So as always, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the video, the very first thing that we need to do is to take a baseline measurement of how tight, restricted, or dysfunctional your ulnar nerve feels before we do anything, so that once we have done those things, you can immediately come back to this same baseline test to gauge whether there's been any improvement at all. Because as I always try and promote on this channel and with my patients clinically, is that I don't want you to have to trust me on any of this. And the only way we can do that is by taking a baseline measurement to start with, doing a specific exercise, and then immediately rechecking that same baseline measurement to see if you can feel any genuine change. All that being said, the simple test that we want to perform is an ulnar nerve neural tension test. And all it requires is to drop the shoulder of the side that you're going to stretch just to tension up that nerve as it originates from the base of that neck. You want to lift your elbow up to about 90 degrees, maintaining that downward pressure through your shoulder. And then with your little finger, we almost want to curl your little finger towards your lip. Now this is very similar to the Dr. Evil pose from Austin Powers. You should feel some tension somewhere along the course of that nerve. Now we want to keep this consistent, so what you can also do is if you tilt your head away, putting more tension through the nerve than if your head was up tall, and take note of not only how far you feel you can go here, but also what you feel through the course of that ulnar nerve. Does it feel painful? How tight does it feel, maybe out of 10? Take a mental note of how that experience felt for you so that we can immediately come back to that same experience once we've completed each one of these exercises. And then what I'd like you to do is once you've done that, please let me know in the comments down below what you feel, if anything, has happened to your ulnar nerve symptoms after each one of these exercises. So as we mentioned at the top of the video, one of the most missed pieces of ulnar nerve dysfunction is the very simple fact that it exits from the spine at the base of the neck and the top of the upper back. And clinically as a physiotherapist, if you can imagine that you've developed some joint stiffness, some muscle tightness, some general dysfunction at the origin of that nerve, then essentially it's like binding that up and the piece of string that goes down through your arm, you're essentially pulling a bunch of slack out of that system, setting the nerve up to fail through any of the tissue that it passes or flosses through when you do the things that you do. So again, if you're not aware, what we want to do with this ball is we want to place the ball as a starting point at the base of your neck. Typically there's a bump that sticks out the most. That's your C7 spinous process. It's essentially the junction between your neck and your upper back. It doesn't really matter where you start because we're looking for the same things regardless. But for the purposes of this, if you can start with the ball on that bump, and again, we want it to be off to the side a little bit. And then we just want to get you to lie down on top of that ball and relax. But all we're looking for is from the bumps down the middle, if you're just off to the side a little bit, right versus left, what you should find is, regardless of which side you're having some issues on, we don't just want to assume it's the same side of your neck and upper back that is dysfunctional. Because again, your nervous system is one fixed length. It's essentially a bunch of string or a bunch of steel cables that run in every direction throughout your body. All we need you to look for is right versus left. We want you to systematically work your way up towards sort of top half of that neck and then systematically down towards almost the middle of that shoulder blade. We're looking for anything that traditionally feels stiffer, tighter, harder, denser, more restricted, or anything like that. But because we're talking about mechanical dysfunction and trying to feed some mechanical slack back into the nerve as it passes through the structures that it passes through, we want to go looking for those handbrakes, those hidden handbrakes up at the base of your neck and upper back. And then once you've found that, we can either get you just to respectfully let the ball just sink in here for 30 seconds or a minute, allowing it to get through any sort of restricted soft tissue, but also hopefully influence some of the deeper joint restriction underneath. And once you've done that, you can just move the ball down a little bit lower or a little bit higher depending on where you are. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, as you start to work your way below the neck onto your upper back, what we can do is if you can straighten your arm, keeping the pressure on the ball, we can take this up as far as you feel comfortable to see how loose it might actually be. And what you might find is once you've found a joint that feels particularly a little bit stiffer and tighter, you may not be able to go as far. And for me here, I'm at about that first or second rib area. I feel like I'm running into some restriction here, but what you should find is the more that you gently oscillate in and out of that restriction, you should then start to be able to see more and more of the side of my face as my arm starts to mobilize that restricted tissue underneath. And all we want to get you to do is systematically work your way all the way up your neck and down through that upper back, looking for anything that you feel is meaningful in terms of stiffness and tightness, and then use movement or constant pressure to respectfully ask that tissue to become less restricted, less stiff and less tight. Then when we come back to doing your ulnar nerve mobility test, then you might find that it's instantly that little bit looser. So please let me know in the comments down below, once you've had a good go at trying to loosen up where you feel your stiffnesses and tightnesses might be, what effect did that have, if any, on the neural tension that you felt through that ulnar nerve? Because if you do notice any genuine change, then you may have just found one of the hidden handbrakes to that dysfunction. So once you've potentially gone looking through the origin of that nerve for any of those hidden handbrakes, the next thing that we want to do is we want to go looking for any muscular or soft tissue restrictions along the course of that nerve. And what you can essentially do is if you can take a foam roller or a rolled up towel or anything that you feel has some gentle, respectful pressure, we can get you to lie down on your side and gently let that press in to the foam roller. Now, what's really important to understand here is that we know that the course of that nerve exits underneath that arm and runs down through the inside towards the inside of your elbow. So what we want to get you to do here is we don't necessarily want you to roll up and down because that can be quite uncomfortable, but it's also not the most effective way to make change. With the foam roller right up almost into the back of that armpit, what we can do is we can start to use movement to shear free some of that restriction. So for me, I've found that I'm on a bit of a tender, restricted, tight spot here. I can gently twist my arm into internal rotation, similar to the idea that we did by using movement to shear free some of the joint restrictions. But once I found that spot, I can just use gentle movement just to work in and out of that range, trying to internally rotate my whole arm, not just my forearm, trying to get the elbow to turn down as best as I can. I can also start to use abduction or shoulder flexion here to really try and shear free some of that restricted tissue. So again, for me, I can find that sort of tight spot here, and then I can use shoulder movement to try and shear that tissue free without losing the pressure that I have on that foam roller. And then as we start to work through this deeper and deeper, you can try and find where you feel the main spots are for you. There's another tight one there for me. As we're starting to get down lower in towards the elbow, we can start to bend and flex that elbow to again try and shear free some of that tissue that we wouldn't necessarily be able to if we just left the roller here. And then you can progress further through that as your tissue starts to adapt and respond to what you're doing. Now, the other way that we can do this is we can have this up onto a table, especially if you feel like lying down's a little bit awkward. But once you've got some pressure on those spots, we just want to make sure that you feel like you can gently shear that tissue free. And then as we're working our way down the course of that, the next logical step is to work down towards the inside of that forearm. Same conversation as before. Again, paying very close attention to how good or bad this feels for you. Once you've found some of that tightness, again, we can put some pressure through there. And then this time we can start to use wrist extension or any wrist motion that you can. That's trying to shear that tissue free underneath that roller. You can then tense the muscle underneath so that when you stop tensing it after about 5 or 10 seconds, it should theoretically relax a little bit, which means it might be a little bit less tender than what it was before. And especially when you're sort of getting towards the elbow or you're up around that armpit area, if there are some particularly tender spots, it might be nice to squeeze that tissue for 5 or 10 seconds, make the muscles work, let it relax. It should then become a nicer experience to do to some degree. So once you spend some time mobilizing the origin of that ulnar nerve, and you spend some time mobilizing the course of that ulnar nerve as it goes down through your arm, we obviously now want to give you a neural flossing technique to try and capture any leftover neural tension or immobility or tightness that's in the system. But at this point, it's really important to mention one really simple thing about neural tissue, and that is that neural tissue doesn't get tight. So if you feel you have ulnar nerve tightness, mechanically what that represents is an increase in neural tension, or that the slack of that ulnar nerve has been pulled out of the system because of something else. We want to get you back into that same baseline test measurement. If you want to, you can definitely do this lying down. But for me, if you just lean up against something, standing or sitting, same deal, drop that shoulder down, lift your elbow up, hand goes over the top with a little bit of wrist extension in there. Depending on how tender and uncomfortable this feels, you can fully tension up your neck to really increase the amount of tension in the system. But all we want to get you to do is quite literally just oscillate in and out of the end range of this position for you. And like any neural flossing or neural gliding technique, if you can do about a set of 15 and maybe 2 or 3 of those sets in succession, again, paying close attention that you're not irritating anything or annoying things, it should feel like a gentle loosening as you go through this exercise. Then once you've done that, drop back into that same position, lift it up, tilt away. And for me, I don't feel any major tension here anymore after combining all of those things together. As I'm taking my neck away, I still do feel some neck restrictions. So it may mean that I need to spend another 10 or 15 minutes just systematically looking for where that residual stiffness and tightness might be, so that when I come back to this, I don't feel like there's any tension in that system at all. If you aren't pairing that up with looking at the course of that nerve, including its origin at the joints, then you may be missing the broader context that you need to know and understand to permanently fix this long term. Because the next conversation that we're about to have is, again, probably the most important, because it may explain why all of this is there in the first place. So the reason why this conversation is really important is that there has to be a reason for everything that goes wrong with the human body. If you have found that one side of your neck and upper back has become stiff, tight, and restricted, but more importantly, when you release some of that restriction with a ball or a roller or a massage or whatever it is, and then you feel like some of your ulnar nerve related symptoms improve immediately, then there has to be a reason why that exact dysfunction is in that exact part of your body and is impacting the symptoms that you're having. And again, you've probably heard this a million times if you've seen these videos before, but in my understanding as a physio, trying to better understand why these things happen, the number one thing that consistently links back to all of these issues is just the basic shapes and postures that you get into the most commonly throughout the day. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the active, interesting things like activity or exercise or work if you have a physical job. What it does speak to is the positions and the shapes, or how you do the things that you do the most throughout the day. Most commonly the stationary, sedentary shapes. And again, for most people, that can be sitting down at a computer, using a mouse, sort of really getting into that dragged down position and just tensioning up that tissue and the nerve. It can be how you drive a car. It can be how you sit watching TV. It can be how you sit reading a book, playing an instrument, arts and crafts. If you're like me, who has the potential to stand and look down and lean forward all the time, it doesn't matter what you do with your neck and upper back. The main thing is how you load up that tissue for the time that you are doing that. Because if you are getting into some shapes where your shoulders are dropping, you're getting a little bit slouchy, maybe you're looking down a lot, and you're creating all this isolated tension through all the structures in this area, then in theory, anything in that area can then become stiff, tight, and restricted, because it's trying to compensate for what you've unknowingly asked it to do for however long you've been doing it for. And if you've found that there's some very logical things that you can do that can improve your symptoms, but then you don't necessarily change the thing or try and improve the thing that may have asked those things to be there without it being your fault, then again, it's unrealistic to expect that this will permanently leave you alone forever. So as always, I genuinely hope that that was helpful and insightful. Please let me know in the comments down below what your experience was with those exercises and what impact it may have had, if any, on your symptoms. If you did enjoy this video, please let me know by leaving a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this type of content. If you've been suffering with some ulnar nerve dysfunction for a long time and you've seen a bunch of different people and no one's necessarily been able to help you, but maybe some of the information in this video has felt like a missing piece to the puzzle, please consider booking in an online consultation with me just so we can delve into the specifics of your dysfunction and see if there's anything that we're missing.